Well, there is an increased contest around exactly what the Israeli government should be doing, even though almost all major players around the world agree it has the right to self-defence. The latest to weigh in has been the former US President Barack Obama, who says Israel has that right to self-defence, but it must make sure to avoid unnecessary harm to civilians. Joe Biden and the US government has also been speaking about avoiding a ramping up of the current campaign, particularly if more hostages are to get out alive. Joining me live is Executive Counsel of Australian Jewry, Alex Ryvchin. Thank you for your time. So first of all, what do you make? We are getting increased calls from very senior figures in the US to proceed with caution here, to really avoid two things. Obviously, any loss of innocent civilians, but also whether it kicks off something broader in the region. What do you make of that?
I think what they're saying is common sense and fairly self-evident. I mean, Israel's military operation is clear. Their objectives are clear. It's to rescue its hostages, over 200 people abducted, held by Hamas. It's to destroy Hamas as an operational force and totally degrade its ability to wage this sort of attack in future. I think it's clear that at the end of this war, Hamas will no longer be the sovereign of Gaza. And I understand there's planning in place to have the Palestinian Authority take over government of the Gaza Strip. Israel has absolutely no desire to reoccupy the Gaza Strip. And obviously in the course of that war, there will be civilian casualties, as occurs in any war, particularly one fought in a highly dense populated area and against an enemy which uses its own civilians as human shields. But inevitably, everyone wants to avoid civilian casualties on the Israeli side, and certainly the Americans and the international community. And I know that Israel will be doing everything in its power to reduce the toll on the civilian population, which is not the target of this operation.
This is the key question, everything in its power. We're not entirely privy to each individual decision on whether a bomb is launched, a target is attempted, and what the sort of, what they're weighing up at that point in time. So, we've seen in the past Hamas has been found to use human civilians as a shield, but those humans probably rarely have a choice. So what is the obligation there on Israel? Because if it knows that innocent civilians are caught up there, but it still wants to hit the Hamas target, should it be proceeding with that bomb or whatever it might be, or not?
Well, we know, Tom, what the Israeli deliberations are, and that is to determine whether every military strike that it seeks to undertake is proportionate under international law. And that requires a very careful balancing in the moment of the military objective of hitting a particular target, which may be to kill a senior commander, which may be to take out a rocket launching squad, or to take out key military infrastructure, against the possible or likely civilian toll of that strike. And the IDF, minute by minute, makes those assessments. It looks at the civilians in the area, it looks at the value of the military target against the likelihood of civilian casualties, and it makes those decisions. These are difficult decisions for any civil military force to make. And it's something that our troops have to decide. It's something that all Western countries, liberal democracies, have to decide in warfare. This is the nature of warfare. Unfortunately, on the Israeli side, you have a country that abides by the laws of war, the constraints that it places to protect civilian life. But unfortunately, there's an enemy there, as you intimated, on civilian casualties on both sides. It will cross the border and slaughter wantonly as many civilians as possible to terrify the population. And at the same time, it understands that dead Palestinians play into its propaganda war. It increases public pressure, political pressure on Israel. Hamas realizes that it can't win a military victory against Israel, and it relies on its propaganda. And part of that propaganda is yielding up its own civilians in this callous, calculated way. But the West can't buy into this propaganda. It only exacerbates and lengthens the conflict and the toll taken on its civilian population.
That equation you spoke of, though, it just strikes me it's a big sort of grey area that it's sort of impossible to judge whether enough care is being taken or not. I mean, if you take the strike on the hospital, clearly from all the available analysis, that was actually not Israel, and seemingly not the number of victims that were claimed. But overall, we're seeing hundreds, from the evidence we have, hundreds, thousands of Palestinians killed. So how do we know if there's the sort of enough, if you like, restraint from Israel? How do we have confidence that when they're making these decisions, if there are enough civilians in the area, they're saying, no, don't target that. Because from what we've seen, there has been some very large bombs land and clearly a lot of civilians in some of these areas.
Well, there's a very high value military asset to be taken down, and that is Hamas, which has shown itself to be a terrorist organization of the most savage and barbaric order. It has become absolutely clear that Israel cannot live, that Israeli civilians cannot have any form of peace and stability as long as Hamas is embedded in Gaza. We know that the Palestinian people, whatever their personal views of Hamas, whether they elected them or not, suffer principally from being led and ruled over by this terrorist organization, which has no regard for civil rights, the rights of assembly, free speech, or any political opposition whatsoever. So the value of the complete destruction of Hamas is immense for the region and for the world, and certainly for the Israeli people, for the Palestinian civilians. But you're quite right, there is a civilian toll there. Civilians will suffer, and it's important to ensure that all reasonable steps are taken to reduce that. Pressure needs to be applied on Hamas to the extent possible for them to allow civilians to leave built up areas which are going to be the heart of the fighting. Israel has broadcast to the Palestinians exactly where it intends to strike to allow people to flee. Pressure needs to be applied on Hamas to enable it to happen and not to fire on the convoys of civilians seeking to leave. But ultimately, the quicker this war can end, with the defeat of Hamas and the release of the hostages, the less the suffering of the Palestinian civilians will be in the process.
What about the reports out of Gaza now from multiple agencies? I'm not there, it's one of those fog of war sort of moments, but that hospitals are running out of power, including the main one in Gaza that has babies on incubators, prematurely born babies. Why not allow them to have electricity to be able to, if what we hear from the Gaza Health Ministry, for one thing, is accurate, to literally keep babies alive?
Well, Israel has, I can assure you, no desire to see Palestinian babies harmed. It has no obligation to provide energy to the Gaza Strip. It has done for a long time, but the international community, I think, can pick up the slack. Israel has no, in my view, moral or certainly no legal obligation to do that. But at the same time, its mission here is absolutely crystal clear, and that is to take out Hamas. Its enemy is not the Palestinian people. It has nothing to gain and much to lose by inflicting more suffering on the Palestinians. But what we do know
just
as
on
well,
that, we're nearly out of time. Just on that, no moral obligation, and I'm sure if you're someone in Israel right now, you'd understand the government cutting off that power. But the rest of the world can't step in if they're going to get alternative energy sources, given where it is and how isolated it is. It can't just overnight switch energy sources. So the realistic impact of cutting off energy is that hospitals are running out of power. So I'm just asking, is that justified when Israel talks about not wanting to target civilians, when if you cut off electricity to everybody, that will mainly affect civilians?
It won't mainly just affect civilians. It also impedes on Hamas' ability to wage war. It shortens the duration and the severity of the war, which ultimately benefits the Palestinian people. We know that Hamas co-opts civilian resources, whether it be humanitarian aid or civilian building supplies, and uses them for its military purposes. That is the only reason why Israel would deny anything to the Palestinian people. It has no desire to do that at all. Its mission is absolutely clear, and that is to destroy Hamas. And again, if there are humanitarian corridors, anything that can be done to lessen the suffering of the Palestinian civilian population, I'm all for it. I know the Israeli public will be for it as well. But Hamas needs to be destroyed in its entirety for there to be any sort of lasting peace in the region. That much is clear.
Alex Ryvchin, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you.